Imagine moving into a new house, hoping for peace and tranquility, only to discover that your neighbor is hiding dark secrets. A writer in search of inspiration finds herself caught up in a disturbing mystery. Her friendly neighbor begins to exhibit increasingly strange behaviors. But what she discovers one night, through the window, defies all logic and sanity. I am Clara, a writer seeking inspiration for my next novel. After years living in the city, I decided it was time for a fresh start. I needed a quiet place, away from the urban chaos, where I could reconnect with my ideas and find inner peace. So, when I found this charming house in an apparently perfect neighborhood, I didn't hesitate to move. I hoped this new environment would be the push I needed to create my best work yet. The move to my new house was a carefully made decision. I wanted a place that offered serenity and inspiration. The house, with its charming facade and well-kept garden, seemed perfect. Each room was spacious and bright, with large windows that let in abundant natural light. The walls, old and full of stories, seemed to whisper secrets of the past. Exploring the neighborhood, I was greeted by a peaceful environment and friendly residents. Among them, I met Lucas, a helpful young man who lived next door. Lucas was friendly, but there was something about him that sparked my curiosity. Whenever I asked about his origins or work, he gave vague and evasive answers, which only increased my suspicion. From the first meeting, Lucas always seemed to be around, appearing in unexpected places, as if he were watching me. Although he was cordial, there was something in his gaze that made me uncomfortable, an intensity I couldn't decipher. Small behaviors started to stand out, like the silent way he moved and how he avoided direct sunlight. Many times, while writing in my office, I felt his gaze through the window or saw him in the yard, watching me from afar. Over time, I noticed increasingly strange behaviors. Lucas seemed not to sleep, being active at unusual hours. Frequently, I saw him through the windows late at night, walking through the yard or leaving for some mysterious place. During the day, he kept the curtains closed and rarely left the house. At night, I heard unusual noises coming from his house, noises I couldn't decipher. These behaviors only increased my suspicion. Lucas's house came alive at night. I saw strange figures arriving to visit him, many of them with a disturbing appearance. The most unsettling thing was that some of these visitors were never seen leaving his house. One day, while watching through the window, I saw Lucas with a completely different appearance, as if he had changed shape. These disturbing details began to consume my thoughts, making me question more and more the true nature of Lucas. My suspicions intensified when I observed Lucas performing actions impossible for an ordinary human being. His reflexes were extremely fast. Once, when dropping an object, he caught it in the air with impressive speed. There were moments when he seemed to disappear from sight, appearing in another spot as if he had teleported. And on one occasion, I saw Lucas lifting a heavy piece of furniture with disconcerting ease. The line between reality and paranoia became thinner for me. With these strange behaviors accumulating, I started to feel a growing unease. During the night, the noises in his house became more frequent and intense, as if a feverish activity was happening inside. During my daytime walks, I felt Lucas's gaze following me through the dark windows of his house, which increased my discomfort even more. There were moments when I doubted my own sanity. But each new strange behavior of Lucas reaffirmed my suspicion that he was not just an ordinary young man. With my distrust reaching an unbearable point, I decided to talk to some neighbors about my observations. However, no one seemed to take me seriously. Some laughed uncomfortably, saying I was letting my writer's imagination run wild. Others simply avoided the subject, quickly changing the conversation or even distancing themselves from me. Feeling isolated and certain that Lucas was not who he claimed to be, I decided to go to the police. I reported my story with all the disturbing details I had observed. The police listened with skepticism, but as a gesture of good faith, said they would go to Lucas's house to check. I waited anxiously as they went to his house. They entered, made a quick visit, and left soon after. When they contacted me, they said everything was normal at Lucas's house, with nothing suspicious. The police's skepticism increased my despair. If not even the authorities believed me, who would? I decided to investigate on my own. Desperate, I began searching the internet for explanations for the strange things I saw at Lucas's house. I researched supernatural creatures and inexplicable phenomena. That's how I came across shapeshifters and vampires. The descriptions and stories aligned frighteningly with Lucas's behavior. The more I read, the more my paranoia grew, and a deep fear settled in me. My research revealed details that left me even more astonished. I read reports of shapeshifters capable of changing form at will, often described as shadows moving independently. There were also stories about vampires who avoided sunlight and were active only at night. I found descriptions of creatures with superhuman reflexes and abnormal strength, exactly as I had observed in Lucas. Each new detail seemed to fit perfectly with the situations I had witnessed, increasing my conviction that Lucas was something far beyond human. My mind was so consumed by the obsession with Lucas that I began to have difficulty concentrating on my work as a writer. Every time I tried to write, my thoughts were invaded by disturbing images of what I believed was happening next door. I spent hours staring at the blank screen, unable to produce a single sentence. My nights were restless, with vivid dreams of Lucas watching me, always with that intense gaze. My paranoia grew, and I found myself constantly checking cameras and recorders, unable to disconnect from this incessant surveillance. Things worsened drastically the night I saw something I could never forget. It was late, and I was in the living room, monitoring the cameras when, through the window, I saw Lucas in the yard. His body began to contort in an impossible way, taking on a bizarre and grotesque form, something between human and monstrous. His limbs elongated, the skin took on a strange texture, almost scaly, and his eyes glowed with an inhuman hue. I was paralyzed with terror, certain that Lucas was not human. The horror of that vision convinced me that I needed to act. Fear took over me after that terrifying night. I decided I needed to do something to stop Lucas before he could harm anyone. I meticulously planned a way to eliminate that entity, or whatever he was. With no other options, I bought a gun, something I had never imagined doing. My intention was clear. Confront Lucas in his own house and end the threat he represented. During the day, Lucas managed to maintain a facade of normality, at least when interacting with me. His cordiality and friendly behavior almost made me doubt my own suspicions. I decided to use this false normality to my advantage. I made a cake, an old recipe that was always a success, and prepared to take it to Lucas's house that afternoon. My hope was that he would invite me in, offering the perfect opportunity to confront him and discover the truth once and for all. When I entered Lucas's house, I was surprised by the apparent normality of the place. The living room was impeccably tidy, with elegant furniture and simple but tasteful decor. There was a bookshelf full of books, a television on a news channel, and a soft aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Nothing there suggested the presence of something supernatural or evil. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that my suspicions were unfounded, and that Lucas was just an ordinary young man living a quiet life. As we talked, I began to feel a growing discomfort. Lucas seemed normal, but small details started to disturb me again. His eyes seemed to shine in a strange way, and his smile was a little wider than usual. My hands began to sweat, and I struggled to stay calm. Suddenly, Lucas began to contort and transform into that bizarre creature I had seen in the yard. The sensation of terror was overwhelming. Amid the growing panic, I decided to confront Lucas directly. "Who are you really?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lucas laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "I am just me, Clara. You are going crazy," he said, his expression changing to something almost cruel. His denial only increased my anxiety and despair. Unable to control my fear, I pulled out the gun I had hidden and shot him. I fired 6 shots, each echoing in the small room, until Lucas fell to the ground, lifeless. The sound of silence after the shots was the only thing that remained. When Lucas fell to the ground, I continued to see him as a grotesque monster. The sight of the dead creature at my feet gave me a mad certainty that I had done something good, protecting myself and the neighborhood. However, the fear of being arrested still haunted me. With adrenaline running high, I ran out of Lucas's house and back to mine, panting and trembling. I waited, heart racing, anticipating the sound of sirens and the arrival of the police, who would surely be alerted by the neighbours. It didn't take long for the police to arrive, alerted by the neighbours who heard the shots. They stormed into Lucas's house and found him dead, exactly as I had left him. One of the neighbours who called the police also saw me rushing out of Lucas's house after the shots and informed the officers. This quickly led them to me. When the police arrived at my house, my heart was pounding uncontrollably. I was absolutely convinced that Lucas was a monster and needed to explain this to the officers. "You don't understand," I said urgently. "He wasn't human. I had to do it to protect us." The officers looked at me with a mixture of shock and disbelief as they began to investigate. They entered my house and started searching for answers. Meanwhile, I desperately tried to convince them of the threat Lucas posed. As the police investigated, they began to find the notes and evidence I had accumulated about Lucas. My notebooks were filled with details about his habits, schedules, and behaviours I believed to be supernatural. I watched them rummaging through everything, still convinced that each item would reinforce my story. However, the officers also found bottles of medication I was supposed to be taking, but were full. Gradually, I realised they were more interested in my mental health than in the threat I believed I'd eliminated. Consumed by guilt, I began to review all my interactions with Lucas as the police continued to investigate. What once seemed like evidence of his supernatural behaviour now seemed like gestures of a reserved but ordinary person. The memories of intense looks, quick movements, and nocturnal visits began to seem exaggerated, perhaps even imagined. Each new discovery by the police revealed a darker truth. I was mentally disturbed. The realization that I might have killed an innocent man, guided by my own paranoia, was a devastating blow. The police, upon gathering all the evidence, concluded that my paranoia and neglect of medication led me to believe Lucas was a supernatural threat. With each discovery, the truth of my mental instability became clearer. I was taken into custody, not only as a murder suspect, but as someone in urgent need of psychiatric help. As I was led by the police, the weight of what I had done crushed my soul. My actions, driven by fear and madness, took a life and destroyed mine. The line between the real and the imaginary had become fatally thin.